Hello, and welcome to my session, Open Worlds, Why Diversity in Open Source Foundation and Open Source Matters. I'm Hendrik Ebbers, I'm from Germany, and since several years I'm working in open source. I'm in the board of the Eclipse Foundation, be part of several working groups like the Adoptium working group. I'm part of the steering committee at Adoptium. I'm even part of technical committee at the Linux Foundation, working on Maven, which comes from the Apache Foundation. So I'm like involved in several different open source projects and foundations. So when hearing the title, like how diversity can matter, people can ask a question. It's like, oh wait, so how can this, white person, and why I'm not a grumpy old man, I'm still not that young anymore, can talk about diversity, right? So what I would like to do is talk about not only about diversity when it comes to people, but in a more global sense. I would like to talk about diversity in groups. I would talk about, as you can see on the top, diversity in open source foundations. I would like to talk about diversity in entities that contribute to open source and contribute to open source foundations. And for sure, I would like to talk about diversity in groups within people, right? So, and when it comes to open source and that topic, so in general, regarding open source, it starts with an idea, right? So, and this idea could be like, oh, I want to learn something new. And then I start, oh yeah, and that is great. Maybe others like it. Oh, there's this GitHub. I can, put it there and then it's open. And oh, there's this GitHub action. I can add all this Q stuff to my project. Whoa, wait, there's a blog somewhere and somebody mentioned my project. How great is that? And whoa, wait, somebody created an issue on my project, people recognizing me and my small project. That is really great. And oh, now I do releases and even have a release schedule, doing releases all 2 weeks. And people talking to me and they create issues and create like feature requests with great ideas that I can implement and learn so much. And oh wait, there's even somebody who paid me on GitHub sponsors $5. So I bought a coffee based on the work I did. That is so great. I even, based on that, hired a designer. It cost way more than I get by GitHub sponsors for sure. But he created a logo of my project and I have stickers. But whoa, that was a lot, right? So wait, and now I have this deprecated code that I'm started with, but it looks like people are still use it, so I somehow need to take care of it. And with the next release, so it looks like I broke kind of software from a guy, and he's really angry in this issue that my last release and the changes I did broke his software. And wait, so that is a lot, right? And I mean, I have a job. I started with that small in my free time. How should I, take care of all that within my job? And wait, whoa, okay, now it's getting strange. There's a person who really putting pressure on me where I'm not working fast enough on that project. So, I mean, what started like, it was nice, it was a great idea, I learned something, actually turned into pain and kind of I totally feel, painful, feel tired of it. I think I need to stop, actually, and I need a break from that project. And yeah, what happens if things stop can get problematic. And actually the community don't help with that so much, which can end in some problems. And even when talking about those big companies that maybe already used my stuff, it can be problematically. So it feels like this nice concept that we have about open source in our mind, right? And how we describe it for our friends. Maybe it's broken. So it's dead, actually. Open source is dead. That was me, Henrik. I hope you liked the talk about the death of open source. See you next year. No, funny. Let's come back and start a reboot, right? So we just had one example, but I said I would like to talk about diversity. And I just thought about, okay, what different types of open source projects do we know about? And I just have some random samples, right? So let's say we have this person, Hinako, who created, like we've seen, a project on GitHub just to learn a new language. Or we have Sarah, and Sarah created something and he put it online, and some people even use it, which is great. We have a company with, I don't know, 300 or 1,000 developers that create this huge enterprise framework that is open source, and they even get money out of it by commercial support. We have a student that did a master thesis in IT, and what he did is he just published the results and the project of his master thesis on GitHub. Maybe we have a government that wants to work in open data and hired a company or consultant to create open data definitions as open source in GitHub. Universities that work together on projects, maybe in science, or even companies working together to create new standards. So all that are open source projects, right? And they're all totally different, starting from the size, from one person working on it, over multiple persons, like a big group, and even up to like several companies or entities bringing people together working on those projects. So saying like, this is an open source project, do not describe what it is, because it can be like from, oh yeah, that is a small project I was trying to learn Go or C++ with, up to, you know, this is this super big application we worked on with 100 people for 10 years. And the same is when we talk about the people that work on open source, the contributors, right? So let's again have some examples. We have Timo. So Timo created a project on GitHub to learn a new language. So his idea was not to create an open source component that is reusable. He just wanted to have version control and so on. So he created a project on GitHub to learn something new, which is, I assume, not perfectly what he created because he's totally new to that language. But he did it in the open. We have Hassam. So Hassam is paid by his employer to work on an open source project. So he's more like a professional, and he's a professional on the project he's working on because he do it full time. We have Jin. So Jin is coming currently from college, right? And she heard about this Hacktoberfest happening each October. And what she did is she just did her first contribution to an open source project at Hacktoberfest. Or we have Tao. Tao is not a technical person. Tao is a designer. And what Tao does is there was this project that needed a mascot. And they, you know, reached out, hey, is there maybe somebody who can create a mascot for our open source project? And Tao, as a designer, said, oh yeah, I like to work on that. And maybe if it comes out, they will have stickers and stuff like that. And I can say, oh yeah, I created it. So what Tao did is he created something and contributed something to an open source project that is not technical at all, right? And all those are people working on open source and contributing to open source, and they are as diverse as possible, actually. So, coming back to the start. So, how can we help the project I just described and the contributors to not end as we see at the beginning, right? And that is where the idea of foundation comes into play, and how to do open source development in a sustainable way, actually. So, and when talking about how we can help, what I always say is there's one talk that is absolutely great on this topic. And if you see that on YouTube and you only have 20 minutes left, stop here, go to the other talk, watch that, because that one is perfect. It's from Shelly Lambert. She's she's working at Red Hat, but leading parts of the Adoptium working group, and she's like my mentor about community work. She's so great, and she did a talk about where she compares community health and community work with, forests and growing trees in forests. That is quite good. And one thing that we learn from the different projects we've just seen and things that, for example, Shelly is saying is that so there's not one size fits all for open source. So we cannot say like, hey, this is a template, we put it on open source project and it fits and the project is secure and sustainable and done, boom. So what we need to do is we need to find more individual solutions for projects. And that actually is why there is not only one open source foundation, but there are actually multiple open source foundations. And I just put 4 here on the slide to show again the diversity. So we have open source foundations like the PHP Foundation, or there are others like the Python Foundation, for example, that are foundations that are defined for one language actually, to say like, oh yeah, we have here a programming language, and we created a foundation for that programming language to have the definition of that language vendor neutral and open in a foundation. Then we have foundations. I mean, we're here at the Eclipse Con, so I assume, or no, we're in OCX, the Eclipse Foundation conference. So everybody, I assume, knows about the Eclipse Foundation, which is an open source foundation that has a focus on enterprise, actually, I would say. Next to it, we have the Apache Foundation, which is quite older, and based on that, has not that enterprise focus as Eclipse has it. So it is more volunteer-orientated, I would say. And then there are foundations, and I just took one example, which is the Open Logistics Foundation, that really focus on one specific topic, and instead of creating for that topic a working group under something like the Eclipse Foundation or the Linux Foundation, a new foundation has been created for that because the topic was so big. Actually, when talking about that, from time to time, you find things that are called foundations that are not really foundations. So examples are is it OpenJS Foundation? So for example, the foundation around JavaScript. That is not a foundation. I mean, it's not a foundation in terms of a legal entity, because that is a group within the Linux Foundation. When coming from Eclipse, people know about working groups, and you have a working group that is working on a specific area, and it's a group within the Eclipse Foundation, so under this legal entity, Eclipse Foundation. On the Linux Foundation, it's a little bit different, and it often confuses me, and when I see a foundation, I need to check, is it like coming from Linux Foundation or not? Because what is a working group in Eclipse is in Linux Foundation a foundation. It's kind of a sub-foundation, but they name it foundation. In theory, it's a working group because it's not a legal entity on its own. So a little bit confusion. But as you can see, a lot of diversity. But there are some things in common when talking about those open source foundations, and that are the benefits that this open source foundation brings to us. People who like to work on open source, with open source, consume open source, maintain open source, and so on. And I added a slide just yesterday because I copied this from the keynote that Mike Milinkovic did here on the OCX 2 days ago, where he showed like, okay, he titled it, "This is our mission." I did it like the mission of the Eclipse Foundation, right? Because that's what he meant when talking about our mission. And he said it's ensure user freedom, empower developers, and enable collaboration. And since I'm now coming from the perspective of an open source project, I think the last two topics are the most important ones, right? Empower developers, enable collaboration. And so what he was talking about when talking about empower developers is to give a team or an individual the tools he needs to create a project, like infrastructure, like a build server, like maybe a mailing list, something like that, to empower the people to share knowledge, right? To create a community, and out of that, we come to this enable collaboration, which is based on all of that, because that allows us to not work on a project alone and as like we've seen it at the beginning, but work together with different entities on a project, maybe even collaborate with other projects and find interfaces between us, and as important as everything else, help to get adopters and sponsors for the project. Because independent on if it's a project of a foundation, if it's a project I started at GitHub, it needs to be paid. That was like in the other keynote, I liked it a lot, where it was like open source is not free as sunshine. You know, and that is important because open source need to be paid. And that is another thing where foundations, not all, but several, like the more enterprise-orientated as Eclipse Foundation or Linux Foundation, help a lot to enable that. So, as said, I put that in. The things that I had in mind when talking about benefits of foundation were they are vendor neutral. I would talk about vendor neutrality in a bigger scope, like in 5 minutes, actually. They provide governance and legal support. I have absolutely no clue about licenses, right? But when you want to do a project the right way and you want that big enterprises use it, you need to be aware of the licenses your project has and the licenses your third-party dependencies have. And you need to provide an open source project in a way that from a legal perspective, it is usable by enterprises. And that is a factor where a lot of developers have no clue about it, and I can understand it, and foundations are more than happy to help. Another one, I already said it, infrastructure and resources, right? I gave an example from Adoptium. We have this Xamarin Java binaries, and we have so many different platforms where we provide them, and we need to build and test them on all those platforms, and having those platforms, maintaining those platforms, that takes so much resources, and we are really happy to have the Eclipse Foundation help us with those infrastructure and resources. And with a foundation and things like bringing people and organizations together, you can achieve standardization, right? Because you can bring the right players on the table so that you can create a standard that is used by several enterprises. Other benefits are shared cost, for example, because when working on a project, and not even working on it, but even adopting it and using it, in theory, all should pay a part of it, right? In best case, just a small part. And foundation helps to enable that. At least some of them, like the Eclipse Foundation, where enterprises need to pay a fee to be part of it and be part of the game, and that is already shared cost, right? Because costs that, or money that, and resources that go into a working group are coming from enterprises who pay fees to the Eclipse Foundation. Security and quality assurance, again, a topic I'm not an expert on, but for Xamarin, for example, for the Adoptium working group, Eclipse organized a security audit for all the things we are doing and working on, and we got a certificate. So that's another great benefit that you get in a foundation. Founding and sponsorship, yeah. So the Eclipse Foundation is working together with partners, governments, and so on, that are willing to fund and sponsor critical work. And a lot of the things happening here, like creating Java binaries and stuff like that, is really critical infrastructure. And the Eclipse Foundation is finding, or other foundations too, are finding ways to get next to the fees coming from companies working on it, even outside money for those projects. Another one, outreach. I mean, we're here at an Eclipse event, and I assume everybody has met Eva or Tanya here talking about Jakarta E, right? And those are people hired by the Eclipse Foundation talking about projects, doing outreach, doing community work. Again, a topic where not all developers are good on, right? Because that's not German. As a developer, you want to develop and not want to run from one conference to another one and talk about the product, because in that case, you do not have time to develop it anymore. And maybe the most important one, collaboration. Because without collaboration, an open source project would be a one-man show. And everything that is a one-man show is a high risk to fail. Because it's only one person who needs to say, oh, I don't care anymore about it. I move away, I will do something else, right? And that is a big risk. And by doing collaboration, this risk goes away. And now you can say, yeah, but I can do that without a foundation. I mean, we have GitHub, people do pull requests and things like that. Yeah, that is nice. And that is contributing. But when talking about collaboration, it's really more like people or companies working together on the same level. And by doing so, they create something that is super important, and that is vendor neutrality. So what does that mean? What is vendor neutrality? I mean, I now talked a lot about companies coming together doing stuff, right? So why is it vendor neutral? There are all these companies working on it. So let's again see it like that. So that is just a random project within an open source foundation, okay? And here we see parties that collaborate on projects that are part of open source foundations. And I mean, there are so many projects, so many parties, so I just took random players. I said, oh yeah, maybe there's a finance institute that is interesting in this project because it wants to use it internally, so it does contribution to the project. Maybe there's an IT enterprise company who says like, oh yeah, we would really like to sell commercial support for that project, for the power users and so on. So we contribute to that project. Then there's a small business that says, yeah, you know, it's really hard to get good new developers. But if we allow our people to contribute to this project, we do something good, the people have more fun, and we get better developers. How great is that? And maybe then there is this individual contributor who just says in the free time, oh yeah, you know, I would like to hack a little bit, learn something new, so I collaborate on this project. And the project grows, right? And all those entities contribute in the same way. So it's not that the IT enterprise is allowed to do bigger code contributions than the individual person, right? All contribute by doing PRs, independent of the size of that pull request. On the other hand, those entities have totally different resources, right? So you might have this finance institute which has like kind of endless resources. Then you have the IT enterprise. It has really a lot of resources. You have that small business that has just some resources, as said. Maybe people can work like 1 day a week on this open source project. And then you have this individual contributor who has mostly no resources, right? Because he do it for fun. So he will never like say, oh yeah, and I pay 1,000 months a fee to be able to be part of that game. And while all those come together with totally different resources and a totally different background when it comes to an open source project, to a working group within a foundation, and about making decisions, all of them have the same rights. So when, for example, this group needs to vote on who should lead that group, everyone has exactly one vote, right? So it's not that, I don't know, the big IT enterprise has 20 votes, the small business has 3, and that individual person only has 1. all of them has the same votes, which means none of them can ever control the project by having like 50% of the votes or something like that. So from that perspective, there is no vendor behind that project. There are multiple companies coming together, working on that project, but none of that companies can ever control it. I mean, in theory, if all other companies say we don't care anymore and only one company is left, then for sure that company can move it forward alone. But that is not the idea that we will follow here, right? So we follow an idea where different entities collaborate, and in that case, all of them has the same rights. And that is how it is done in open source foundations like the Eclipse Foundation or the Linux Foundation, actually, where commercial entities pay a fee to be a member of a working group. Actually, often the fee even depends on the income of that company, right? If a company is quite big, it pays more than a small company. And there are other foundations, like the Apache Foundation, for example, that do not have something like that. So for the Apache Foundation, you never pay anything because there is not the thing about having commercial entities members of it. In the Apache Foundation, only people are members. And the problem with that is that there is not enough money for the project. With that approach, where the entities, especially the commercial entities, need to pay a fee, we already have resources that we can use for the projects. But on the other side, independent of the fee that you are paying, you will only have one seat in a committee, right? So if there is for example, for an open source project, the finance committee, it's not like, oh yeah, my company is so big, so 50% of the income of this project is coming from me, so I have 50% of the seats. No, you have exactly one. Like this individual person that is a contributor of this project because he did over the last 3 years so much great work. And if you want to have something like that, it comes actually with a little bit of paperwork, to be fair. Like things like that, so the roots, like, oh yeah, we have communities, we have groups, everybody has the same rights, and you need to be paid if you want to be a member based on this table, and this and so is how votings are working. That is often defined in charters, actually. And so when I started my open source journey, that was always where I said, oh no, now it's getting too complex. I don't want to know about that, right? But what I learned is that it's quite important. And as it is in reality, as long as you live it and the group live it, you do not need to look all the time into the charter, because it's like with a code of conduct, right? So a code of conduct, from my point of view, is just another rule that an open source foundation or an open source group has. And you do not start your day of work with looking into the code of conduct. I hope you don't do it. I mean, a code of conduct, you should look into it if there is a problem. And the same is for charters. If there is a problem, if there is a question, you can look at it, but it's not like, oh yeah, when I join a project at the Linux Foundation or at the Eclipse Foundation, it's all this paperwork, I need to read all this. No, people will help you. The foundation has people that will help you to understand it and will explain it to you. And in the best case, you do not need to read all that. If you're a big player that puts a lot of money into it, maybe you should have at least one person in your company who have read it. But yeah, anyway, so that is about roots that are quite important. And so if you still says, oh yeah, I don't want that much roots, that is tight complex. There are even foundations. At the beginning I showed like several different foundations, and there's, for example, the Commonhouse Foundation that is not that rule intensive, but on the other way, it do not focus on like collaboration that much, because the rules are needed for collaboration. If you work alone on something, you don't need rules. You do not need even a code of conduct. I mean, you will be nice to yourself, right? So all that comes into play when the organization or the foundation you're working with or your project is in is going in the direction of the Eclipse Foundation or the Linux Foundation and heavily working with enterprises and collecting money for the projects. If all that anyway is way too complex for you and you say, yeah, you know, I have an open source project, that's a small one, but I mean, I don't want to have all this voting process. Even at Apache, there are votes when I do a release, so I don't want all that complexity. I have a project, I have 2 friends that contribute, that is fine. So there must be another way to help my project to be sustainable instead of joining this big foundations. And there are alternatives. I will show you some. Actually, one very nice and cool alternative is the sovereign tech fund that is has been established 3 years ago by the German government, and that helps critical infrastructure in the open source sector to be sustainable by providing money, investments into those open source projects. And it's an open process where you can submit a project and describe why you need money, where do you want to use that money for, and so on and so on. And then the sovereign tech fund will review that and, in best case, make a contract with you so that you get money for your open source project. And it's actually working. I can show you an example how I currently try that with my company, with Open Elements. We've created a program which is called Open Elements Support and Care. And what we are doing, we're working together with the Maven community to get money for the Maven project. Because Maven has a problem, it's an Apache project. So there are no commercial entities paying money for Maven. There are some people working for Maven in their free time. And with the new release cadence of Java, all 6 months, all the new features coming to Java, and so on, that is really a lot of pressure on those people to keep track on that while working on a project like Maven that is growing and growing and growing in their free time. So what we are doing is we use Open Elements as a company to work together with the Sovereign Tech Fund to get money for the Maven project that is then distributed in a transparent way to people, freelancers and hired people who are already committers for Maven, and enable those people to work like for a year or something like that on Maven and help to get this project sustainable. Another idea is Open Collective. That's what is it? It's not a foundation, it's a collective where you can just get money for projects, for communities. In theory, it's communities, but a lot of open source foundations use it, where you can say, you know, I have a project here and can you give me money? So you can, it's just like sponsorship actually. But for small project, it kind of works. And another last thing that I really like are Eclipse interest groups. That is quite new within the Eclipse Foundation. And it's, you can think about it like it's a small, tiny, easy working group, because in an Eclipse interest group, different parties, like companies, can come together in a way smaller and easier environment than a full working group and collaborate and focus on a specific topic. So the idea is, oh yeah, let's start with an interest group and see if we get the right people on the table start discussion about a topic, and let's see, maybe out of that a working group will be created, right? So that's a very, very lightweight approach to get connected to others, individuals and enterprises. And there are not so many working groups officially announced so far, because the starting process is not, I don't know why, not in the open, but I know that there was work on some groups that will be announced in near future. And another good thing on that is it's grassroots, right? So if you, again, say, oh yeah, I do not like all that paper stuff, creating an interest group is a good thing, because that is really lightweight and easy. So those are some alternatives to working groups to create open source software that will be sustainable and that will not depend on just one single person. Yeah, that was the short overview, actually. So if you have any, oh yeah, we are over time, maybe time for one question, if there is one question from the audience. Okay, looks like there's no question. Perfect, then we are not that much over time, only 2 minutes. So I hope you liked my presentation about diversity of open source projects and open source foundations. And yeah, hope to see your project like next in one of those. Thank you.